He just wanted shelter from the storm. Now he's part of the decor. £200. That was the price of my life, apparently. That's what my so-called friends decided my continued existence was worth. £200 sterling for one night in Galloway Forest Park. The catch? I had to do it during a full-blown December squall, wearing nothing but the briefs on my body. The laughter inside Reese's rattling Ford Fiesta was deafening, bouncing off the fogged-up windows as the wipers fought a losing battle against the deluge. It was a manic, drunken sound that did little to warm the knot of ice forming in my stomach. "You're really gonna do it, Kalen? You mad bastard," Reese shouted over the roar of the engine and the storm. I just gave him a tight, shaky grin. I was a student at Oxford. I was supposed to be the smart one. But bravado is its own kind of stupid, and I had it in spades. The car skidded to a halt on the shoulder of a desolate road that cut through the forest like a fresh scar. Outside, the world was a churning chaos of wind and water. The headlights cut a pathetic slice into an infinite suffocating blackness. "Time to pay the piper," Sian said, his face a devilish mask in the dashboard's glow. The moment the car door opened, the storm seized me. The wind ripped the warmth from the car under my lungs, replacing it with the raw, wet smell of pine and decay. I stripped down on the soaking asphalt, my clothes instantly heavy and useless. The laughter from the car was tinny now, distant. All I could feel was the rain, not like drops, but like a solid, freezing sheet of water being hammered into my skin. My blue Calvin Kleins felt like a joke, a pathetic shred of civilization against the raw, untamed wild. My bare feet met the road, and the shock of the cold was so intense it felt like a burn. "See you at dawn," Champ Reese yelled. The car door slammed shut, a sound as final as a coffin lid. The red tail lights bled into the rain, shrinking to twin pinpricks before vanishing completely. And then I was alone. The silence that descended was more terrifying than the storm. It was a deep, ancient quiet that the wind and rain couldn't touch. It was the silence of a place that had never known man and didn't want to. My first task was the 200 steps. 200 steps into that black moor, away from the memory of the road. I had to prove I'd done it. 1. The gravel underfoot was sharp, biting. 10. My body was already shaking uncontrollably, a violent rattling tremor that started in my jaw and went all the way to my toes. 50. The trees closed in, their branches like skeletal fingers clawing at the bruised, moonless sky. The rain wasn't just falling now. It was being driven sideways, finding its way into my eyes, my ears, my mouth. 100. I couldn't feel my feet anymore, just a dull, throbbing ache with every step. Each footfall was a gamble on unseen terrain, slick rock, sucking mud, tangled roots that seemed to grab at my ankles. At step 195, the ground simply ceased to exist. There was no trip, no stumble. Just a sickening lurch of emptiness as my foot found only air. I pitched forward into the void, a strangled cry torn from my throat. The fall was a violent, chaotic symphony of pain. My body slammed against something hard, a rock ledge that stole my breath. Then I was tumbling, scraping, tearing down a steep, unseen slope. Branches whipped at my face and sharp stones flayed the skin from my back, my arms, my legs. It felt like I was being torn apart. When I finally came to a stop, wedged in a tangle of roots at the bottom, I couldn't move. I just lay there gasping. The world a spinning mess of black and grey. Every inch of me screamed. A warm wetness, distinct from the cold rain, trickled down my ribs. Blood. The rain was washing it away as quickly as it flowed, erasing the evidence of my injuries. My briefs were shredded. A long tear ran down the seam, the thin, soaked fabric clinging uselessly to my shivering skin, offering no protection, no dignity. The cold was a physical presence now, a predator sinking its teeth into my bones. Panic, cold and sharp, cut through the pain. I had to get back up. I had to find shelter. Trying to climb the slope was impossible. My legs screamed in protest, refusing to bear my weight. I was trapped at the bottom of this gully, exposed and bleeding. Desperation clawed at my throat. I staggered forward, using the trees for support, my vision tunneling. The forest floor was a treacherous soup of mud and leaf litter. And then, through the sheets of rain, I saw it. A shape. Darker than the darkness around it. Solid. A structure. It was a cottage. Not a quaint, charming thing, but a squat, brooding hovel made of massive, moss-eaten stones. It looked less like it was built and more like it had grown out of the earth itself, a cancerous stone tumor on the landscape. It was the only hope I had. As I got closer, I could see it was ancient. The roof was slate, and the single door was a thick slab of dark, weathered wood. There were no lights, no signs of life. It was probably derelict, a shepherd's bothy abandoned decades ago. Perfect. I stumbled onto the stone stoop and raised a trembling, bloodied hand to knock. My knuckles had barely brushed the wood when the door swung inward with a low, guttural groan. The sound vibrated through the soles of my numb feet, a sound of deep protest from a thing long left undisturbed. The air that billowed out was wrong. It wasn't the clean, wet air of the forest. It was thick, stagnant, heavy with the smell of dry rot, old paper, and something else, something faintly sweet and cloying, like meat left too long in the sun. Hello? My voice was a pathetic croak. Silence answered. A waiting, listening silence. Stepping inside was like entering a tomb. The fury of the storm was instantly muted, replaced by that heavy, oppressive quiet. My bare, muddy feet left obscene prints on a floor coated in a thick, undisturbed film of grime. It wasn't dust. It was a settled, almost greasy layer of time itself. I searched the small space. A main room with furniture draped in what looked like rotted canvas sheets, their shapes like shrouded corpses. A small, dark kitchen where rusted-out pots sat on a cold hearth. It was utterly, completely abandoned. Then I found the bedroom. It was a small, square room containing only a single, simple bed frame. The mattress was bare, stained, and looked impossibly uninviting. But it was horizontal. It was shelter. I could lie there, ride out the storm, and deal with the consequences in the morning. If the owner showed up, a near impossibility, I'd explain the dare, my fall, everything. I considered taking a shower, a ludicrous thought. The taps in the small, grimy bathroom were seized with rust. They wouldn't have moved in a century. So I just collapsed onto the bed. The mattress gave a damp, squelching sigh beneath me, a cold and lumpy thing that felt like it was filled with wet rags. I kept the tattered remains of my briefs on. It felt important, somehow. A last, futile gesture of decency in a place that felt utterly profane. And that's when I noticed the walls. They were covered in portraits. Dozens of them, from the floor to the ceiling, all in heavy, dark frames. They were painted with a skill that was nothing short of genius, an unnerving, hyper-realistic detail. Some subjects wore medieval Scottish dress, tartans and stiff collars. Others were more modern, in tweed jackets or simple frocks. Men, women, children. They had one thing in common: their eyes. Every single pair of eyes was fixed directly on me. Not in the way that paintings sometimes seem to watch you. This was different. This was active, intentional. Their expressions were a gallery of horrors. Some had wide, unsettling grins that didn't touch their cold, dead eyes. Others wore looks of such profound, concentrated hatred that it felt like a physical blow. A woman with a lace collar had a look of smug, cruel appraisal. A burly man with a thick beard seemed to be judging my worth, his lips curled in a sneer of utter contempt. They weren't just paintings. They were an audience. And I was the show. A primal fear, colder than any rain, began to creep up my spine. I tried to reason with myself. It was the cold, the blood loss, the exhaustion playing tricks on my mind. I was hallucinating. But the feeling wouldn't leave. The feeling of being watched, of being weighed and measured by these silent, painted figures. Their stares were a pressure against my skin. I couldn't take it. I rolled over, facing the damp stone wall, my back to the room of eyes. I squeezed my own eyes shut, but their faces were burned onto the inside of my eyelids. The last thing I remember was the feeling of 100 pairs of eyes on my naked, bleeding back, and the sound of the mattress faintly squelching as my shivering finally began to subside into the black, welcoming abyss of unconsciousness. The next morning, the forest had been scrubbed clean by the rain. The air was crisp and cold, the sky a fragile, watery blue. Reese's Fiesta was parked in the same spot, but it was no longer alone. A police car sat behind it, its lights off, and a severe-looking Land Rover was parked in front. Chian stood shivering by the side of the road, not from cold, but from fear. Kaylin's parents were there. His mother was weeping quietly into his father's shoulder. His father's face was a mask of granite, his eyes fixed on Reese, who was being questioned by a grim-faced police constable. He didn't answer his phone, Kaylin's father said, his voice dangerously calm. All night. Not a single call went through. Reese's bravado had evaporated, leaving behind the pale, terrified boy he really was. It was a joke. A stupid dare. We were coming back for him, I swear. The constable gave a sharp nod. A search party was already fanning out into the woods. They knew these forests. They knew how quickly a bit of fun could turn fatal, especially for a half-naked city boy in a storm. Reese and Kian joined the search, their guilt a heavy shroud. They called Kaylin's name until their throats were raw, the sound swallowed by the immense, indifferent woods. An hour passed, then another. Hope was beginning to curdle into dread when Kayan spotted it. Tucked into a gully, almost invisible from the main path, was a stone cottage. There he yelled, pointing. He would have gone there. He must have relief washed over them. Of course. Kaylin was smart. He'd have found shelter. They crashed through the undergrowth, their boots sinking into the soft earth. They found the door slightly ajar. Pushing it open, they stepped into the stale, heavy air of the interior. Kaylin? Reese called, his voice echoing in the oppressive silence. They saw his footprints immediately. Bare, muddy tracks leading from the door, stark against the thick grime on the floor. A wave of relief, so strong it was dizzying, hit them. He was here. He was safe. They followed the tracks into the bedroom, and then they froze. The room was just as Kaylin had left it. The air was thick with a strange, oily smell, like turpentine and something metallic. The bed was empty, but on the stained mattress there was a damp patch, a perfect body-shaped impression, still cold and clammy to the touch. On the walls, the portraits stared down at them, their expressions a mixture of triumph and malice. Reese felt a chill that had nothing to do with the morning air. His eyes scanned the painted faces, the leering grins, the hateful stares. They were all ancient, their canvases cracked and yellowed with age, all except one. Hanging directly above the head of the bed, in a space that must have been empty before, was a new portrait. The paint was still wet. It glistened, slick and luminous in the weak morning light filtering through the single grimy window. The canvas around the figure was stark, fresh white. The figure itself was Kaylin. It wasn't just a likeness, it was him, captured with a horrifying, soul-stealing precision. He was painted from the chest up, his skin a deathly bluish white. His lips were parted, his mouth open in a silent, eternal scream. But it was his eyes that held them paralyzed. They were wide, fixed on something beyond the canvas, something a human mind was never meant to see. They were a perfect crystalline record of the exact moment a soul breaks. The tattered scraps of his blue Calvin Klein briefs were visible at the bottom of the frame, a pathetic, final detail. Sian let out a choked, gagging sound and stumbled backward out of the room. But Rhys couldn't move. He couldn't tear his eyes away. As he stared, locked in the dead gaze of his friend, he could have sworn he would swear for the rest of his tormented life that the fresh, wet paint of Caelan's eyes shifted, just for a fraction of a second, to look directly at him,